I'd give you a nice little video tutorial of how I would edit for black and white images. You guys have already should be familiar with the camera raw filter and everything, but I just want to quickly refresh your memory on how we want to open our files and proceed. So as you can see, have an image open on my screen, and I want to go ahead and do a save as on it so that I know that I can save my edits and have a correct file type and everything. So I'm going to go up to File and down to Save As. And yes, mine's already saved as a TIFF, but based on how we name our photos in our class, I wanted to show you the correct way to do that. And the best way is just to click to the beginning of the file name because it's always highlighted when you go in, or you can hit the left arrow key to go to the beginning, and you want to type your last name, first initial, and then you can, if you don't want to leave the original file name, you don't have to. In this case, I don't mind, but something that helps me to know whose image this is and hopefully which assignment, so that it's different from each one. And make sure you know where that you are saving it. I am saving it in my folder for this class, and normally you would be putting it in an edited folder for the assignment as well to make sure that you don't lose track of it. You want to make sure that it is a TIFF file, and if it comes up, it usually starts out as Photoshop. Just click where it says Format and scroll down to TIFF. Once you have the correct file name in the right location and the right file format, go ahead and hit Save. And any box that comes up, just hit OK. We don't need to change anything on that. All right, so we are ready to start editing, and I'm ultimately going to start with the basic editing workflow handout that I handed out earlier in the semester. So if you're wanting to follow along, that is what I am using. So one of the first things we want to do after the Save As, which is step 2, we want to duplicate our background layer. And as I've shown before, there are a couple different options. You can take and click your layer and drag it down over this new layer icon here. You can right click and say duplicate layer, which is one of my favorites, or you can also hit Command J on a Mac or Control J on a PC. Either way will work. And there's also, of course, the layer menu at the top and duplicate layer. All right, so now we've got our duplicated background layer. And again, that duplicated layer is just to make sure that our original image is safe, that if we do need to go back and undo things and start over, we have a fail-safe built in. So the next thing we want to do is step 4, and that is convert this new duplicated background layer to a smart object. And we want to go to, I just did a right click on that layer and convert to smart object. You can also go up to the filter menu here and convert for smart filters. Again, we should be familiar with these at this point. Either way works, doesn't matter. All right, so the way we know that it's that smart filter is that little square in the bottom here. Now, once we've got our smart object, we want to use our famous camera raw filter. Yes, I know I've shown you other ways to do black and whites. I find that this one is the easiest. You can get way more out of it in one location than having to do a gazillion adjustment layers and layer masks. So the first thing we want to do is we still want to edit as though we are doing a color image, because the white balance still plays into the final image that we get. So the best way to do the editing is honestly just to start from the top of these tabs and work our way down. So we're going to go down to the basic tab here. And personally, I feel like this image is a little cool, so I'm going to warm it up just a tiny bit. And it's looking a little bit better to me. Exposure is actually not too bad. I'm going to leave that one alone for right now, but if your image looks kind of like that, then I would suggest maybe boosting it up a bit. I might even actually drop down just a tiny bit. And again, I'm watching my histogram here, and remember that good exposure has tones all the way across. And if you're looking at your histogram and you see these little things lit up, this is showing where solid black tones are. And for shadows, they show up as blue, and highlights will show up as red. So I'm going to adjust my highlights. I like to usually drop my highlights down, but sometimes I like to add white back in because it helps to add a little bit of contrast. And if you watch my histogram, I'm going to go a little bit crazy, and there you can see I've gone a little too far, and the red that is showing up right here, those are areas of bright white where the detail has been lost. So generally we want to come back down so that just to where they are, that they're not there. Same thing with the blacks. So oftentimes I actually lower or raise my shadows, and notice it will help a bit with some of the darkness. And if you really want, you can still bring up your blacks just a touch. Again, I'm looking to minimize how much contrast I have, but I still have a little bit of blacks and a little bit of whites. This means, and then if I look at my histogram, I've got tones all the way across. And if you notice, the cursor changes as you go, and you see different areas highlighted on this histogram. If you don't want to edit directly with these sliders, you can also click in the area here, and you can see what it's doing. Okay, so I could go quite a ways if I really wanted to on my shadows. I don't really want to go that far, and you'll see why. So again, I'm just moving down these panels here, and I'm going to adjust some texture, because texture helps add in a little bit of that sharpness and the details, especially in those smaller areas, which aren't necessarily bad to have, especially in something like this scene where it's very landscape, very detail oriented. Dehaze may or may not be helpful. So think of haze as almost like a fog on your lens. A lot of times I do use the dehaze on something like this because I want to get the nitty gritty landscape texture. All right, now I'm not going to worry too much right now about the vibrance and the contrast. I mean, I could make it super saturated or not. I'm going to leave it alone right now. All right, so I've done quite a bit with our basic tab. I'm going to move on to the tone curve. And I think this will show us a little bit more detail later. So I'm going to come back to this actually. I mean, if I wanted to, I could again add a little bit of those lighter tones, lighten up the darks a bit. Maybe I want to bring back some shadows for some contrast, and maybe drop my highlights so I don't lose a lot of those details. All right, we'll come back to this one because you'll see how it plays out with black and white. I'm going to go down next to my details tab, and as I've mentioned before, I generally do a bunch of sharpening, and if you notice, I just clicked right around where I would normally start, and you can, if I click the eyeball, you can see the difference between before and after. Now this is a little bit too much sharpening because the edges have gotten what we call crunchy. So I'm going to back down on this just a little bit, and I don't want to have it so soft, but I don't want to have it super crisp either, because then it starts to look fake. I usually do the radius at about 0.8, but you might, for something like this, you might want it a little bit bigger. Just play around with it and see what you like. I usually don't mess with the details tab, but I do love the masking, especially in images like this where we have clouds. We don't want them sharpened. They don't need to be crunchy. We don't need the details heavily in them because they're soft clouds. So I'm going to often take my masking slider and drag it up. Now you're probably wondering, what the hell is it doing? If you hold down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac while you're dragging the slider, it will switch and you can see where the masking is happening. So in this case, everything that is white is going to be sharpened. Everything that is black is not. So for skies, I usually go so that the sky turns solid black, and right about there looks pretty good. Okay, so generally I add a little bit of noise reduction and color noise reduction. On these low levels, you're really not going to see a lot of change, and that's okay, but it does help because almost every single camera will put in a little bit of speckling from digital noise. All right, so that's pretty much all we're going to do at this point. Now, if you haven't already and you decide that you want to get rid of some spots, maybe I want to get rid of this little bush here, I'm going to click on my healing brush panel here, and I'm going to choose my cursor. Maybe I want to get rid of this little bush right here, and hopefully it goes away. And we can try to get rid of this area. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if the spot looks a little funky to you, you can always just hit refresh on this, and sometimes give it a minute, and just keep hitting refresh till you find one that looks somewhat believable and doesn't look out of place. And sometimes it gets a little repetitive in where it pulls from and it looks really weird, or it gets kind of blurry, and that's okay. Okay, that one's not horrible. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that one. Now, if I really wanted to get rid of like these little blades of straw or whatever that's in here, I could do that as well. Okay, so now that we've done some basic color edits, we've done some basic healing, I want to go ahead and convert this now to black and white. And the easiest way to start is to go up here where it says the edit menu, and I'm back on the editing panel here. I'm going to click on black and white. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off these little clipping masks or clippings for shadows and highlights. And this image isn't bad. It's got some good contrast, but I feel like there's just something kind of missing. So one of the things that I like to do is to go back into my tone curve and start playing around with this. And again, black and whites tend to have a good amount of contrast and details. And right now I am just looking at the grassy area on the ground, and I'm looking at this, and I know my sky is getting blown out, but bear with me, just trust me for just a minute. So I can add a little bit of brightness in here too. I may or may not want that. So darks, I tend to come down a little bit. I might have just gone up, but sometimes the shadows help with that contrast. And if you're still like, there's still something missing, there's other options you can do as well. And we're going to do that in the masking panel here. So it's, you have your editing, your healing, and then the third one down here is masking. And a lot of times I might use one, and I'm going to select the sky here, because remember I was adjusting those sliders and it was getting really blown out. It was getting really bright just so I could add texture down here. All right, so I'm going to come back into my sky, and I'm going to bring those highlights back down because that cloud texture is really kind of cool. Maybe I want to reduce the whites just a bit here. And something that may be cool is to add, yeah, I know it's black and white, but if you notice, changing the temperature slider is changing how the image is portrayed in the sky. And again, I still have my a lot of the same settings here as well. Okay, and I realized I forgot one thing. So I'm going to go back to the editing panel here. And we didn't talk about the black and white mixer. And when I talk about black and white images, and some of them, the best ones turn out when you have a variety of colors. This is where this really comes into play. And as I adjust different sliders, you'll see different things happen. And it just depends on what tones are present in the images. So reds really didn't have any impact, but oranges do. So I get to decide how light or dark do I want to make those. Do I want them to be really bright and blend in? Or do I want them to darken them down just a touch? I think I want them just a tiny bit brighter. Grass tones, and when you have greenish grass, tend to have yellow and green in them. So keep that in mind. And you can adjust based on how you want it to look. So again, greens. So maybe I want to boost my greens, and maybe I want to darken down the yellows a little bit more for a little bit extra contrast. Again, this is not a formula by any means. This is all whatever you think looks good. All right. Skies tend to have aquas and blues, but because this was an overcast day and clouds tend to have a blue cast, we have some aquas in the grass. So again, adjust as you think looks good. All right, so now look at my blues in the sky. Even though it's a cloudy day, very ominous looking, dragging my blues darker really had some intensity to it, which I kind of like. Purples may or may not be there. Oh, no, sometimes they happen in the sky, sometimes they don't. Okay, and then same thing with magenta depending on your landscape. And anytime you decide there's nothing in there and you just want to reset, if you just double click on the slider, it will reset everything there. Okay, so that is a really great start for our image. Now, one of the things we like to do in black and white photography is what we call dodging and burning. In the darkroom, it was a 2-for-1. So if you did dodging, you would ultimately be burning somewhere else. Photoshop separates those two tools. And I'm going to show you two different ways. The first one is inside of the masking panel. And then the second one is going to be using the curves outside of this as an adjustment layer. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new mask. And I'm going to use the brush. And this is the easiest way to think of dodging and burning. I'm only going to adjust my highlights because when you dodge, you're brightening the lights. So I only want to affect the lighter tones. I don't want to affect the shadows. So by only adjusting the highlights and or whites, and I'm going to do whites just a tiny bit, and I'm going to even make sure that the flow on my brush isn't 100% so that I can kind of ease into the effect. So if you notice, I'm going to start brushing in over here on this tree, and it's really not doing anything. And that's because it's full of shadows and midtones. But if I come over here, I'm going to start painting into the clouds. And again, I don't want to blow it out because I want to keep some texture, but I want to add a little bit of contrast by brightening the lighter tones. Okay. Now, if I really wanted to, let me blow it up to 100% so you can see how quickly it can adjust. Okay. So it can really adjust quickly. And again, I don't want to lose all these details. And if you're wondering how much I've done, let me show you. So I'm on my mask here and see this little eyeball right here. It says toggle visibility. So I can see before and after. So it's lightened up the tones quite a bit. And if you decide that you want to come back and get rid of some of the brushing that you've done, but you're not sure where it was exactly, you can hit the show overlay and it will show you everywhere that you paint. And if red is not your jam, feel free to change it. You know me, I'm a pink person. So now I can see everywhere that I have painted. And maybe I want to come back and I don't want to lose too much detail here. So if you look at my cursor, right now there's a plus sign in the middle. And if I push the Option on a Mac or Control Alt on a PC, it's going to change my cursor. It's going to change the size to whatever it was last time for the subtract. And I can use my bracket keys on my keyboard to adjust the size. And I'm going to feather a little bit just because I want to blend into what I'm doing. And I got my flow set at 50%. You can adjust it however. But I don't want to lose the tones right in through here because those were already pretty bright. Okay? So you can just brush in, and this helps you to see where you've brushed. And again, this is because I've only adjusted the highlights. I am only adjusting those tones. It's not going to affect the shadows. Okay? So now, before and after. Before and after. So all I've really done is just brightened up a little bit of the brighter tones. And now I want to do the same, but I'm going to do it for the shadows, except I'm going to do what they call burning. And when we burn, we are darkening. So I'm going in, I just selected my brush again. And this time I'm going to darken down my shadows just a little bit. So again, I could paint right here in the sky, and you're not going to see much change unless those sky clouds are darker. So you might see a little bit of change. All right. But maybe I want to add a little bit more right in here. I want to bring this out a bit. So I'm just going in some of these darker areas to kind of make them a little more punchy. And this one you can tell is doing a lot more, a lot quicker. So now if I do before and after. And again, it's only affecting those darker tones. All right. Again, if I don't like some of the stuff I did, all I have to do, since I'm on the brush, if I hold the Option key or the Alt key, I can paint over where I don't want it. So like this got a little too dark and heavy for me. So I'm going to take that away. And I'm just going by visual appearances to my eyes. If I wanted to, I could click my overlay to see where I did, like, oh, there's some spots that I missed, and take those away. Okay, so now I want to show you another way that we can do dodging and burning. So this is kind of an old school method where you only affect the tones and paint in them. Another option, and I'm going to click on these. I'm going to hide these masks for now, just so that you can see the differences and so that you can see what the adjustments are going to do. Okay, so I'm going to create a new mask, and the next one I want to show you is a luminance range. And what this does is it allows you to select certain tones. So if I click on one end and I drag it, notice how the brighter tones are going away. And that's because it says I only want to work with these shadow tones. Okay. And if I drag this bar, that's how quickly it feathers and how soft it gets, how quickly it changes. And if you don't want to mess with the blacks, you can take those out. This is all, again, how you see this. But again, maybe I wanted to darken these tones down just a touch more, or maybe I want to brighten them. It's up to you. How much details do you want to show? Now, typically, this is a dodging and burning technique, and I'm lightening shadows in the shadow tone. But again, go with what works for you. And if I wanted to, I could still even put on my mask for the shadows, and you can see what effects it's going to have. Okay, which not much. So the first method I showed you with the brush is going to be a little bit more targeted to the spots in your image that strike you as interesting versus the luminance range, which is based solely on tones. And you notice on the luminance it shows you everywhere that it's highlighted. And you can do the same thing with the highlights as well. So that is how I would use this Camera Raw filter in a nutshell. But I'm going to go ahead and hide these masks for now because I want to show you one more way using a curves adjustment layer. So the only thing I have done is the sky masking. And one other quick tip, if you are going to do the sky and you're going to add or adjust your sky colors and the mixers, sometimes you'll get some speckling or some banding where it kind of looks like it's throwing glitter in there, and sometimes it doesn't look as smooth. So one thing that I really like to do in my sky, I'm going to close these panels, is down here in my effects on my sky mask, I like to drop the texture just a little bit to help bring back some of that softness, and it'll also help to smooth out any color gradation that might be happening. So it looks like we might have a bit here. You can also add in negative sharpness. So, okay, so I'm going to hit OK on this. So we've done our healing, we've done our basic black and white adjustments, and that's come a long way. So if I go before and after, before and after, so it's looking pretty darn good. I'm pretty happy with it. But like I said, this is essentially having no dodging and burning, and I wanted to show you one more method here, and that is to use a curves adjustment layer. Now, some of you may have this panel looking like this, and if you want to see the actual names rather than having to guess, click this little icon here, whoop, and then it'll bring it down here. So I'm going to go to the curves adjustment layer, and I am going to drag down the shadows. Okay, now, right now, because this has a built-in layer mask when I click on it, everything that is white is being affected. I'm going to tell it where I don't want the effects to happen. And so when you're using layer masks, you want to make sure that you are using black or white. Those are the two colors that show up in the layer masks. And you want to make sure to use generally a soft brush tool. So if we go to B on the keyboard, so you don't have to try to find it in here, it should highlight the brush tool for you. And up here at the top, if you click where it says, oh, it shows a little dot and some numbers, that's telling you the size. And you can choose different versions. So soft round is my favorite for using the layer masks because you can blend it in. And hardness at 0% means it's really, really soft. So it's going to be able to be very blendable. If I were to do a hardness at 100, it's going to give you this nice solid circle, which we don't want. So I'm going to adjust that back down to 0% so that I can kind of blend it in a bit more. Now, you have other options with your brush as well. So kind of like what we did before with the masking, I adjusted my flow so that it's not blasting it right away. So I might want to drop it down a little bit so that I can sneak up on the effect. Okay, so I'm telling it where not to do the curves adjustment layer. Okay, so maybe the sky's getting a little too heavy for me. It's all your interpretation, okay? So I'm just painting over, and as you notice, as I'm painting over, it shows up here as black. And again, that's where I'm telling it not to paint. And if you decide, oh, well, I didn't really want to paint there, you want to make sure you're on black and white. So you can click on this little icon, and it'll make it black and white. You can also push D on the keyboard for default, and then the letter X will toggle back and forth. So this little icon will also toggle. So the top one here is your foreground. The back one is your background. The only one we're concerned about is this one on top, which is your foreground. So black will paint or will hide the effects. White will show. So I was painting with black before, so now I'm going to use white, and I decided I wanted to keep this a little darker up here. So I'm going to paint that back in because I like that extra texture. So you see how easy that is to work. And again, I can do another curves layer. So I was adjusting the shadows there. So maybe I want to drag one up to brighten things up. But now I don't want to lose the tones here. So again, I'm going to push D on the keyboard for default, just to make sure I'm still on black and white. And I'm going to push X to toggle so that black is my foreground and I'm still on that brush tool. And I'm going to paint in where I don't want the highlights. And again, if you use the bracket keys, you can make your brush size smaller. Okay, so we can add a little bit of drama back in. And again, this is all how you see it. Every image you do will be different. And as you notice, as I'm painting with the soft edge brush, it's kind of blending it in as I go. And maybe I don't want to put it right there because that's starting to look really muddy and dark. All right. And again, maybe I don't want to, maybe this is too bright for me now. So I'm going to push that X to toggle my colors. Okay. So this is another way to do dodging and burning so that you're brightening the brighter tones, darkening the darker, and getting a good amount of contrast. So there's the before any dodging and burning. There's after. Before and after. So again, this is all your interpretation and do what looks good to you, but I wanted to show you a couple good ways to do that. As for sharpening, I'm going to strongly recommend doing it inside of the Camera Raw filter using the texture, clarity, maybe dehaze, and the details tab to bring in that sharpening effect. Yes, there are other options, but if you're using the Camera Raw filter, there's a good, strong sharpening built into it, and it doesn't require making sure that you have another image layer that's not a smart object, and it's just going to be easier to use. So hopefully this helps you all with some black and white editing. Again, there's more than one way to do things, but these are the ways that I find work the easiest, and I hope they help you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.